Hello and welcome to the latest in our series of HealthTech World Roundtable discussions. And today we're focusing on the subject of taking development from concept to the clinic, rethinking the medtech development journey. And I'm delighted to say, to help us rethink that journey, we've got a fabulous, experienced panel with us who've agreed to share their insight and their experience as well today. So I'm going to ask our panelists to kick off the discussion by introducing themselves and saying a little bit about themselves, their organisation, and their areas of particular focus. If I could start with you, please, Morven.
Yeah, sure. Hi there, Alistair. Hi there, everyone else on the panel. It's lovely to meet you. So I'm Morven Shearlaw. I'm from a company called Fearsome. We are a medical device development agency, and we work with medical device companies and pharmaceutical companies to help develop new devices, diagnostics, delivery systems. Our particular area of focus is ophthalmology, neurology, and targeted drug delivery. And we're often working with sort of complex problems that are trying to balance really complex technical issues with usability needs. So that's our area where we are kind of have the most kind of excitement about. So currently we are on the roller coaster of concept to clinic with several customers, and really enjoy that process. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with everyone else to discuss the topic further.
Great, thanks for getting things going, Morven. If I could come to you next, Lyubomyr.
Yeah, thank you very much for invitation. I'm Lyubomyr Dutko, CTO of Lemberg Solutions. We specialized in building and validating software for medical devices and digital health. We play a role as a service supplier for medical device manufacturers and startups, and operate between product owners, regulatory teams, and other service supplier to coordinate delivery and actually to bring a compliant product to market. And respectively, we see the Medtech business from this perspective. So this is from which point I can comment today. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks very much, Lyubomyr. Can I come to you next, please, V?
Yes, good afternoon. And thank you once again for the invite. My name is Mapunde. I'm the co-director for something called the HealthTech Research Center. We are funded by the NIHR, which is the National Institute for Health and Care Research in England. And the NIHR is extremely large, and I don't think I've got time to go through this on this particular call, but happy to discuss that individually with people. But in a nutshell, the NIHR is the research arm of the Department of Health. So the NHS treats patients, the NIHR generates research evidence for the NHS to use. So that is our function within the medtech, healthtech landscape, is that we generate evidence for companies, startups that are developing their medtech, healthtech products. And we are there to support in terms of providing the clinical expertise, patient and public involvement, and to help them accelerate the development of their products through many different forms, some of which include health economics and developing the right evaluation methodologies. Our particular area of focus is on surgical technology, so from diagnostics that support the surgical function all the way to post-operative care. So we are one of 14. So if surgery is not your thing, there will be another HealthTech research center that does the exact same thing, but for a different clinical area.
Great, thanks very much for that explanation, V. And last but not least, Robert.
Thanks, Alistair. So I do something completely different to everyone else in the medtech space. So I'm a UK and European patent attorney and partner at a firm called Reddie Grose, and I head our medtech business development team. My background's in the tech part of medtech. My doctor's a PhD in physics and not a medical doctor, and I work with the team I head, a cross-disciplinary team, and often working with them together with colleagues who understand the med bit better than I do, and depending on the levels of med or the levels of tech in any particular invention. I'm based in Cambridge, UK, and my clients range from local startups or other startups in the wider Cambridge ecosystem. I've got many established small business clients, and also I have clients from all over the world, especially the US, and often very large companies, often Silicon Valley is a particular area where they most come from. I'm very intrigued by this discussion because we're all going to come from this from very different angles. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Great, thanks, Robert. And I hope that makes it a very rounded discussion. I'm sure it will. Just before we break into an open discussion, I'd like to go around the panelists again and just ask them for their thoughts on the current state of play. With reference to the medtech development journey, what's working well? Where are we? Are there barriers to adoption? And just get each of the panelists' take as a base point for our discussion. So if I can start with you again, Morven, and we'll just go round in the same order before we break into that more open discussion.
Yeah, I thought that was coming. So yeah, I think, so state of play is very exciting. You know, there's lots of things going on. There's lots of startups, companies developing new things. There's lots of opportunities. There's lots of big strategics looking for new concepts or new things to broaden their portfolio. I think in general, and this is maybe a slight blip, that money seems to be a bit of a problem at the moment, people getting from one stage to the next, and maybe it's a particularly a UK problem. Sorry, I think I've got a wee bit of feedback on my call, so I'm hoping that no one else is getting too much. But in the UK, we work with a lot of clients who are maybe at early stages, but they're not really at early stages. They've maybe been developing something, or they're a clinical expert. They've been working on something for 20 years. But to get to the next stage is always a bit of a barrier because they need the proof, and the proof needs money. So to get to that next stage, to go out and maybe partner with a large strategic company, they've got a big challenge to get the burden of proof, basically. So we're often working with people who are doing little bits at, little steps. There are more programs that are helping support that, and I know V is obviously very, very much involved in that type of thing. But I think there's still one of the major barriers is people accessing enough funds to get to a point where they've got something that is clinically proven to be used in clinic. From our point of view as a business, we always are championing user involvement, so engaging with clinicians, engaging with patients as early as possible in the process. And that is also engaging with the market. So a barrier to adoption is people just not knowing that the product exists. There's a huge issue where people get things clinically proven, they go through a regulatory process, they have something that's made that people can buy, but no one really knows exists, and also it's not really required from the market. So I think those two are the main things that I see are the problems, but in saying that, there's so much positive things going on, and I think everyone kind of knows about these problems. I'm probably sort of preaching to the choir a little bit in that, everyone is aware of what's going on in the industry, and I do think there's a lot of programs, sort of government funded, and also even sort of boot camp type things where there's been progress towards trying to solve these problems.
That's great, Morven. And I promise the next time we go around the panel, we'll start in reverse order. But thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to those subjects of access to finance and awareness during the course of the discussion. Lyubomyr, your take on where we are at the moment, what's working and where there are barriers.
Yes, so maybe I will start from the place where some early stage startup already found money, because usually we come at this point and they mostly have already identified some scope that should be done. And here, usually we deal with like two core tasks, whether it is possible to implement as a technology. And as soon as we understand that it is possible to implement, the next question would be whether this technology is compliant with the regulation. So very often you need to reject or refuse some like technology opportunities because of these limitations. So this is what we see from our point of view as a service supplier. Yeah,
Thanks.
that's all.
Thank you, Lyubomyr. V, same question.
Yeah, so from our perspective, so we tend to deal with mainly startups, a couple of SMEs, and healthcare professionals, academics, and you're typically looking at people towards the end of TRL3, and they're looking to translate their particular concepts into clinical practice. And as Morven's already said, the key thing there is the funding. There isn't enough funding for the early stages, so typically people are looking for 10K, 15K, 20K. That's what they really need to see whether the concept is going to fail fast or not, which is really what we are about. Is if it's going to fail, let it fail fast and let it fail cheaply, compared to getting £3 million and then failing at that particular stage when you're sort of close to the finish line. So that's the first challenge on our side, is just access to funders or funding streams or investors who are not that risk averse, because it's the riskiest phase of the product development process, and it's the one where you've got the least money. So that's always a challenge. The second aspect of it is we get people, everyone wants to sell into the NHS. I can understand that. The NHS looks like a cash cow. You've got one organization, hopefully if you get something in 5 trusts, the rest of them will follow, and that kind of thing. And our function within that ecosystem is to help people understand, first of all, the pathways, the treatment pathways, because the unit cost of a particular innovation is actually not the issue. It's what is it displacing within that pathway? What is the reimbursement model? And we work with companies to understand that at the beginning, before we go to proof of concept in a clinical setting, so that we know that we're working on something that people are going to know about, and something that the NHS is actually going to want to put its money down for. So from that perspective, it's really about the lack of awareness of how the NHS actually works and how it actually gets technology in. There is this assumption that we work on an American model, that this only costs $50, so it should be fine, compared to something that you're using for £5,000, and they don't realize the NHS can pay £50,000 per something if it's going to reduce £2 million down the line. So it's not necessarily about the unit cost. So I think the biggest challenge there is just the lack of awareness and the lack of education.
Thanks very much, V. Your take on where we are at the moment, Robert.
Thanks, Alistair. So I wanted to start this with a positive message and then explain where things are less positive. So it won't surprise anybody with my background, I want to focus on what's happening in the patent space and therefore as a metric of innovation in this space. So the number of patent applications filed in this space continues to go up. So the European Patent Office, good metric, releases statistics every year, annually, setting out the number of patent applications in each tech space. So last year there were about 16,000 European patent applications filed in Medtech, which is about a 25% increase over the last decade. So from about 10,000 a decade ago, it's about 16,000 now. So things are growing. That means there's innovation going on, and things are happening, things are changing, and changing a lot. Interestingly, about 40% of those patent applications are from Europe, 40% from the US, and about 10% from the big Asian markets for tech, China, Japan, Korea, and the rest, 10% rest of the world. What feels slightly disappointing, and it's not unusual across other tech spaces, is the UK contribution to the European amount is pretty feeble, disappointing, perhaps I should say, at 2.7% compared to Germany at 9.5%. There are various sort of particular reasons about where employment law works in Germany that encourages the filing of PAN applications in Germany, and of course has a larger population. But the other reason it might be interesting and why the UK feels relatively low in this space is that, and I wonder, a lot of our innovation is in software, and that has particular issues of patentability in Europe, and that may limit the numbers. There also may be choices there where it's sort of black box type tech you can keep secret. People may choose to not file applications for the tech. And we also have, I think, smaller companies working in this space. None of the large filers, and the large filers are the big names you'd expect, like Philips and Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and so on. None of those are UK-based clients, companies. They are based outside the UK. And we are seeing deals done. I mean, that's a good metric. We don't necessarily hear about sales of individual products. What we do hear about is when our clients themselves are sold, or when they are getting new injections of funding. So I had probably the biggest deal of my career in last year. One of my clients was sold for $13 billion in Medtech space. But normally deals for selling a company, they're much smaller companies at sort of $10 million mark. But they're happening more than other tech areas in which I work. But what's key is the US is always key. The money always comes, in my experience, from the US, and even UK companies are looking for sales in the US and not necessarily in the UK. It seems easier to get things done in the US than it is in the UK, and frankly in other European countries, for example, as well, or indeed in Asia, and in Africa, for that matter. Why is that? I don't know. I mean, I can speculate. And so I would say, and a lot of people are going to be saying this, it's the way that, as it's no big deal, it's the way the NHS works. It's very difficult to get into it. And I think but I don't think that's particularly different to any other health service around the world. They're all massive organizations, and they're all a bit disjointed. It makes it very hard. And with that in mind, I think the barriers are particularly when you have a product with general applicability. So the deals I've seen have been very specific products for a very specific purpose. They've dealt with a very specific condition, perhaps a particular way of imaging, particular way of treating, particular way of testing for a particular condition. They're very specific. You can focus your efforts. Where people seem to struggle is with a product with general applicability. So, for example, soon after the pandemic, the big area of growth seemed to be in this space was looking at the patient journey. Software looking generally to how you get patients from admission to being treated and looked after efficiently and well, administrative task that would cover the whole NHS, so we could join it together. Don't see traction there. It's very hard. And that's a sort of general product. And that seems where the barriers are getting in my view, is getting these generally applicable products to be updated. It's really hard.
Thanks very much, Robert. That's a sort of good platform maybe for us to move on and open up the discussion. I think our audience would be really interested to hear about examples of successful development journeys and what are the characteristics of getting from concept to clinic successfully. So I'll just open it up and let any panelists that want to maybe describe an example of a successful development journey or the characteristics of where it works particularly well.
I mean, I guess I can start with one or two, but when we funded, so back I think it was about 2018, 2019. When we actually did have funding for this particular stage, we did fund a startup, 10K, to do some health economics. But basically, people will know them. It's Apian, and they're the ones with the drones for chemotherapy down in Southampton. But the original idea actually for them was they wanted to do transplant organs because of the way the organ transportation model works. It's a hub and spoke. So the way the pathway is, let's say someone dies in Newcastle, that organ has got to go to a different city, get the necessary testing done. And if that recipient was in Newcastle, you've basically moved that organ away and it has to go back. And the more time the organ is outside the human body or in suitable conditions, then the less suitable it becomes for transplantation. So we worked with NHS Blood and Transplant to work out what that pathway is. What would they consider viable from a health economics perspective? How would that work with their regulations and the things they need to look at? So we funded health economics, initial early phase health economics for them. And the basic gist of it was we couldn't even use animal models, for instance, to do as a proof of concept. Well, what they did suggest was that we use chemotherapy because it has similar time conditions and time constraints. So that is what we did the proof of concept on. And the rest they say is history. I mean, that worked out really well for them. And they're doing really well in the chemotherapy space down in Southampton. And I think they're looking at, it also works with Isle of Wight because you can only access Isle of Wight by ferry, for instance. So that definitely has helped to cut down the times for that. However, based on that, NHS Blood and Transplant are now interested in looking at how can we transfer this to the organ side of things, because we know it's economically viable, but how are we going to make it work in practice? So that's sort of some of the things that we help to do is we can divert your original idea to generate the information you need, or sometimes your original concept just does not work in the particular clinical area that you were looking for. So that's a good news story. I mean, there's one that didn't quite work out with another company where they had a probe that could detect cancer cells, during the operation. Our suggestion was they go with pancreatic cancer, high mortality rate, diagnostics are really, really poor. It's just difficult to diagnose. And even if you diagnose pancreatic cancers, for instance, the tumor tends to be near a key vein or an artery. So that makes surgery almost impossible. So that would have been a good place to actually look at it. However, their investors decided to go down the breast cancer, skin cancer route, which is actually, yes, it does affect a lot of people, but when you look at it from the NHS perspective, there are treatment options, there are diagnostics options, there's a very well-established pathway to getting things sorted in that particular area if you're a patient. Now, their argument was, with their particular technology, it would mean for women, for instance, you get to save the breast, you save the organ. But from the NHS perspective, why save an organ if you're not 100% sure you got rid of most of it? That would end up costing a whole lot more if we use that particular technology. And then 2 years later, the patient comes back and the cancer has progressed, whereas they know if they cut the breast off, most of the times that is considered successful. People go on to lead longer lives. Yes, they might be missing an organ, there might be mental health and things around that. But from a health economics perspective, and also not having the worry about has the cancer come back, that is actually the best option for the NHS. So that's how we work with companies to just get them to understand that what you have in your head is not how it actually works on the ground. And if you really want to get it on the ground, you have to ride the horse in the direction it's facing, basically.
Thanks, V. Some great examples there. Would anybody else like to talk about examples of how the journey, from concept to clinic can work particularly well, or actually where maybe it hasn't worked so well?
I think, can I make a
Please
contribution?
do.
Yeah. So in my experience, and it's hard to generalize, but I think when we've talked about this, and I work across various tech spaces, the thing that the thing that seems to work best in medtech is that the companies running the work are run by people who are more experienced. So in other tech spaces, people who are new, they're perhaps recent graduates, they're fairly young, they're as equally successful as older people with more experience. In the medtech space, experience seems to count. And I think this is because you have, and typically my experiences of will be perhaps a medic who's been working in a particular a surgeon or something, some particular skills in that space, and they've gone throughout their careers. They haven't got a tool that's helped them, and they've thought, I can make my tool, and that'll work. That's not to their age, it's to their experience, that they've had the opportunity to be in the NHS and other organisations and know how it works, and they've been able to, it helps them get into the system, I think, and that seems key and different to other tech spaces where that doesn't help you. It's getting into this one very specific and difficult organisation that's made all the difference, I think.
Thanks, Robert. That's helpful. Morven,
Yeah, can I just follow up on what Robert and Vi were saying, actually? So in terms of that experience piece, I think that's definitely really key, having people that have been involved in either the clinical area or have taken products to market before as well, and understand how hard that is and how long that takes. But also, I think the regulatory involvement is really critical. So there's one of our customers that we've got a fantastic sort of long-term relationship with. They have got a device that is a very high-risk device. So it's to do with targeted drug delivery into the brain. And actually, the regulatory advice has been utterly key, and dealing with the FDA and dealing with what is actually the strategy for that. Initially they were looking at going down one path, which turned out wasn't quite exactly the right thing, and now the development is following the strategy for the regulatory path. So that kind of input from experts who know the field. So it's not just regulatory experts, it's people that have got expertise in that particular type of device technology. So I think a lot of help can come from the expertise, but I do think, sort of picking up on something that Vi said, there is a little bit of luck involved, like something that happens along the journey where you meet someone or you do a particular trial or something else happens, and that just means maybe there's a slight pivot in what you're doing, or there's an opportunity for a different type of customer. So the company that I mentioned, they haven't got a product in the market yet, and it will be a while before it is in the market because there's a long regulatory process. There's a lot of clinical development needs done, but they actually are already earning money to a certain degree by helping companies do clinical trials of their drugs. So they've got a device that can help deliver drugs. So they're helping companies that want to deliver drugs test their drugs, which means they've got a bit of income stream, but it also helps them do the development. So I think one of the successes from their point of view, or what we're seeing, is they're able to do a lot of development, which they're going to have to do anyway, but they're learning all the time. So it's about learning, a little bit of fortuitous, kind of a little bit of luck on your side, and then also involving people that really have been down that path and know what they're talking about.
Thanks, Morven. From Lemberg's perspective, Lyubomyr, you must see a lot of projects coming through. What sort of marks out those that are particularly successful in terms of how they proceed from those that maybe are a bit less successful?
Yeah, maybe I will go vice versa, because I think majority of what we observe are unsuccessful, and still we can identify some patterns that happen very often, and that's why we can say initially that probably it will not end happily, but still you shouldn't be always kind of a killjoy on every project, so still you advise the customer and support. But anyway, which pattern we very often observe, that there is a startup with a very good idea, and they even have already some safety classification identified, and they even already have a delivery date that they want to target, and sometimes even they have some additional asset, like a development plan under the hand. and also additional requirement that the product should be certified. And what very often happens, you start the project, and the next 2 months, for instance, you work on collecting requirements or of finalizing them. And after that, you do the review of the development plan, you do review of the scope, and you should to develop everything new that you have collected to the new plan. And definitely you need to change everything. And very often you have the moment that maybe this additional feature, like during next half a year, should be definitely in the scope. So you have this kind of scope mass. And finally, you have a decision, maybe we don't need to be certified, maybe that should be a lower class device, maybe that should be a device that provides kind of a second opinion for the doctor. So it would be just a usual software. And finally, it appears that maybe there is no a market need for this specific device, because still you had to do some MVP and try in a peer group of future users where the market needs the product at least. So this is what often happens, and still it happens every time we take kind of a new customer. So we had to do this kind of educational intro, what should be avoided and what should be taken into account.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lyubomyr. Can I move on to where the panel thinks the big opportunities are to improve pace and speed, impact and reach? Again, open question for the panel. Where are the big opportunities to improve that journey from concept to clinic?
I can contribute something, but it's not very exciting. I mean, it should be more money to invest, more opportunities to the NHS. I mean, that's what you need, and it's very hard to do. But yes, that's be there. I still never really understand why it's so hard. I mean, there's yeah, but it is really hard, and so I don't have a crystal ball. That's why it's such a. I'm not saying anything very original, I don't think, but I don't have any solutions. But that's what the problem is.
So you're saying access to funding, one thing. I didn't quite catch the second thing.
Access to the NHS, well, sales. I mean, and I think in any country, the health service in that country, they're very big organisations. They're very disjointed and they're very hard to get into. And they're often very traditional as well. I think they're quite set in their ways. And it's hard to change, and so that's in my view, they are the problems, and I don't have any solutions. I mean, are they getting any better? I don't know. I don't know what the panelists think over the last several years. I don't know.
Okay, that's helpful, Robert. Well, those are opportunities, I guess, if you could change those things. And I assume from the NHS, you mean the ability to navigate the NHS and understand it more clearly.
Yeah. I've been to so many conferences where you see people who can tell everybody how to navigate the NHS, but they don't seem to be able to nail it. And there's all sorts of apparent ways in, and I see it, and they all sound brilliant, and yet. How much change do we see? I don't know.
Okay, thanks, Robert. V.
I think part of it, I mean, I do agree. I mean, money is always a good thing to have. So we could do more if we had it. But I think from our end as well, I think it's just the lack of awareness and education in some sense, because the way that we see it is, there's lots of, help you navigate the NHS, help you get into procurement and that type of thing. And I think the opportunity there is actually understanding what the NHS actually wants. I don't think that's been clearly articulated to anyone in any space. So if you're developing a surgical technology, so for instance, we will get people, maybe they've got a different type of endoscope. That's not really something that you will go sort of flying through the NHS procurement, for instance, because they got maybe 10, 50 other companies doing the same thing. And I think if innovators understood how they looked in that competition, then they might start to think differently about their offering. So, for instance, what we're seeing a lot of is a lot of companies are coming with different AI theatre scheduling tools and all sorts of things. And there's a lot of sort of digital sort of technology and apps and things like that. And those things are just notoriously difficult to get funded under the current NHS system. So my question would be, why are you pushing for that? What makes you think you're going to be the first one to break through? There's a whole queue of people that have got really terrible stories behind trying to push stuff through. And it's not because the NHS doesn't want them. Sometimes it just doesn't align with their priorities. But what are those priorities? It's understanding, what does a good technology look like to a transplant surgeon compared to a bad one? I don't think people know what those characteristics actually are. We also see a lot of technology that, from a human factors perspective, just means you can't successfully adopt it or implement it in an NHS setting. So yes, you might have the right ergonomics and you might have used the right material and everything in development, but when you actually put it into clinical practice, it just doesn't work. It disrupts everything. There's lots of examples of kit that's sitting in trusts that cost loads of money, but it's increased the clinic times, double them or treble them. And that's not how the NHS is reimbursed. That's not how it's rewarded. It's not rewarded by how long, a consultation takes. It's rewarded on other measures. And I think if people understand more of that, then that design and development and testing element means it's more likely to go through, because then you will actually work with the people responsible for buying it rather than approaching them at the end when you've got your technology, and then they start asking all these questions and you think, well, you should know this, or there's this paper, there's all this evidence. To them, it's like, well, what evidence? Who told you we wanted it that way? So the opportunity there really is about, from our end, is articulating that need, because then I think you can use the funding more effectively if you know what the kidney surgeons want, or what the diabetes people want. You can use that funding much more effectively, and then that has knock-on effects when it comes to venture funding and investments, because it gives them a bit more confidence that our money is going to go somewhere.
Yeah,
that fits exactly with my experiences, that I've said that it's specific products, particularly medical devices rather than software, that work where there is a specific need. It's exactly what we see, the businesses that succeed. It's really interesting.
Exactly. And I mean, AI is a big problem because there's some innovators that don't want to release I'm not an AI person, so I'm going to say things that are not going to make sense. But basically, the algorithm, there's a lot of innovators that won't release the algorithm, but the algorithm is actually the most important part for a clinician. They need to know what you're training it on, how is it basing those decisions. And if you can't release that, they're just not going to work with you. And it could be a potentially good AI tool, but everyone's going to turn their back and say, well, we need to understand what it's doing.
Thanks, V. Thanks, Robert. Morven, Lyubomyr, any thoughts on the big opportunities, Lyubomyr?
Yeah, so I would extend already mentioned thoughts regarding the technology. So that would be good to use actually the full potential of available technologies, despite that could be treated as dangerous ones. For example, like remote patient monitoring tools, where anyway you are alone with nobody, but potentially in a very long distance, there is available doctor, but you have a tool and a lot of capabilities actually to provide the doctor with a lot of evidences if you utilize the technology potential. And I think during the COVID times, a lot of never used before technologies like video cameras, when you communicate with doctor and show doctor the body, the parts that are in pain. So still you used everything that potentially can help you to become healthy. But on other side, you have the regulations. And when you have a perfect, brilliant product idea, you take the regulation list and you actually remove majority of things that will make life of a lot of people more easier. But still there are the rules, and you had to be compliant. So this is the big potential. If the regulations could be somehow reviewed, or I don't know, to be more precise for a very specific cases like remote patient monitoring, when there are no doctor and no possibility to find the doctor in a radius of some hundreds of kilometers, like this.
Yeah, thanks, Lyubomyr. Any thoughts, Morven, on the big opportunities to move things forward?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything that everyone's mentioned is totally, what I would say as well. I think the remote patient things moving into the home is like one of just the big trends within medtech and health tech. Removing the kind of the pressures that are on the healthcare systems. There's a lot of people getting older, there's a lot of people living longer, so therefore people are needing treated in different ways. So those are the opportunities, and I think there's a lot of interesting people, there's a lot of interesting concepts and startups coming around about these. I think the opportunity to get the successful things is engaging with the market early on and understanding what people need. So it's not just the clinicians, it's not just the patients, it's the buyers as well. So the NHS or whatever the healthcare system is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, most of the customers that we deal with, they're going to the US first of all, just because there are more opportunities to actually get things into clinics. And start testing things. There's just more opportunities, there's more people there. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think if you can develop it and get it through the FDA, which is for certain things, the sort of gold standard in terms of everything else kind of isn't necessarily aligned regularity-wise, but if you can do the FDA, they can probably do the other ones. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to go that approach and then come back into your own healthcare system. So focusing on, getting the NHS to buy it is not necessarily the be all and end all. And I think it's maybe more prudent to be looking out with the UK. So there's definitely opportunities there. Certainly, as healthcare moves from clinic into home, there's a huge amount of opportunities for different types of devices. Lots of, from my point of view, usability challenges, which is where I are particularly interested, and I think that's where the focus needs to be for devices to be actually accepted and used and safe and effective and all that kind of thing. And again, given a bit more money for probably not necessarily the early stage, but allowing people to make that jump from maybe like TRL 3 to TRL 6 or 7, that aligns differently with the medical device development, but that bit where people are starting to get clinical evidence, and then they have got something that they can then start actually potentially partnering with larger companies.
Great, thanks, Morven. I'm going to sort of draw the strands of this discussion towards a conclusion now by asking each of the panelists just to say a few words about their hopes for the future. I hope there are quite a few policymakers watching this as well. So you may want to take the opportunity to say a few words to legislators and policymakers about your hopes for the future and some of those things you'd like to see change. Just before we go around the panel for a final time, is there anything that we haven't covered that any of the panelists would like to speak about? And if not, Morven, I'm going to be as good as my word and start with Robert and go in an anti-clockwise direction as I see it. Robert, just a few words about your hopes for the future when it comes to improving that journey from concept to clinic even further.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very privileged that I get to see tech before it's public domain, and I'm seeing great innovation, and I'm very excited by that, and I hope we'll see big improvements. But I think as a consumer of health services, it's exactly the thing we talked about that's really hard to do that I'd like to see improved. because I'm seeing specific improvements. I'm seeing treatments for new drugs, but my journey, I'm seeing new drugs, I'm seeing new devices helping all sorts of conditions. What I'm not seeing is my journey through the system getting any better. Indeed, it feels now increasingly archaic, disjointed, and so I would love to see some of these software tools making things better. Yeah.
Great, thank Robert. And I assume you mean, as a consumer, actually us having a bit more control and information about our own treatment and our own journey as individuals.
Oh, the whole journey, absolutely. Yeah, from appointment making to knowing where I'm going to looking after my family, both the generation below me and the generation above me. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Robert. And V, concept to clinic, your hopes for the future?
As someone who worked in another part of the NIHR that was very pharmaceutical based, very pharmaceutical focused, my hope for the future would be that we have a similar pathway that we have for pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceutical companies, that pathway, the process of getting reimbursed, is relatively simple compared to Medtech, HealthTech. They know what they're doing. They have clear steps and guidelines. It's relatively easier for them to understand their regulatory pathways and what they have to do in order to get into whatever healthcare system they need to get into. And what I would like to see is something similar for HealthTech, Medtech, because I think a whole lot of the challenges people are experiencing is it just literally looks like the Wild West. You just try something. If it fails, try something else. Pharmaceutical companies cannot work that way. They have to follow a certain pathway. So having a very clear innovation pathway, which includes a very clear reimbursement pathway, that would be heaven.
Great, thanks very much, V. Lyubomyr, your final thoughts?
Yeah, so I would summarize this. I think that always you have some task in this area in Medtech, and you have new technologies under the hand. So every year that would be potentially a different extended set of technologies, and but technology usage is kind of a cultural thing that you have to be used to, and you have to develop it in yourself. And this takes time, and regulations restrict this. So you may have a lot of new innovative opportunities to resolve some issue, but because of this regulative restrictions, everything would be slowed down. So I think especially the areas that need more help from the point of innovative technologies, maybe they should be a little bit liberal regarding at least trying how we can resolve it, and maybe after we can apply these technologies, because we can see after how it is used and what would be the dangerous side of things, maybe vulnerabilities only after of that, but not in advance. Yeah.
Thanks, Lyubomyr. That's great. And Morven, you get the final word.
Yeah, well, thank you for leaving me last. It's meant I've had time to think of my answer and forget my answer as well. So I think, thinking about the future, it would be amazing to see the healthcare situation in the UK being able to look after the elderly population and put more money, have more people, basically. I'm not sure how the clinic, the concept of clinic fits into that, but potentially it means getting things to clinicians faster. And I'm probably going to come back to that funding that allows things to be developed, along with making sure that there is a market and user involvement and clinician involvement, is ideal. What I said at the start was, there's lots of great programs that are really doing these things. I think we need more of it, and more funding which is available a little bit later on for people. So it's not just the sort of the micro first steps. It's really when people are starting to have to spend big bucks, before investors are interested, because unfortunately in the medtech space, investment usually is absolutely critical to get into market. So, but there is a stage where investors are interested, but there's a long few bleak years where investment isn't interested because there's no marketable product yet. So I think it's filling in that gap where I see the biggest opportunity for making the biggest difference in the future. And, hopefully the NHS becoming the thing that it's meant to be, which, is, healthcare for all and providing the service that everybody needs. So yeah, lofty goals, but I'm not 100% sure how we get there.
Thanks, Morven. That's a really positive note, I think, in which to conclude this discussion. It's been a searching discussion, but one with I think, a really optimistic tone. On behalf of HealthTech World, I'd just like to thank Lyubomyr, Morven, V and Robert, our panelists, for sharing their experience and their insight and making it such an informative discussion as well. For all those that are watching, thank you very much for doing so. Please share this discussion as widely as possible on social media and on all the other channels that you use. It really does deserve to be seen by as many people as possible. So thank you once again. I'm sure we'll revisit some of the strands of this discussion in future roundtables. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.